Yesterday, we were looking at the Magi. And as a part of the description of the Magi, we found that they had two conditions for a person to become a king of Persia. One was that the Persian king mastered the scientific and religious discipline of the Magi. And does anybody remember what the expression that we find in the book of Daniel and Esther that describe this knowledge of the Magi? It's called the law of the Medes and the Persians. That's the same thing as saying the laws of the Magi. Second condition is that the king had to be approved of and crowned by the Magi, which means that they are what? Not kings, but kingmakers. Now, during the Babylonian captivity of the Jewish people, we have a person who rises up in the royal household, if you will, of Nebuchadnezzar, of his advisors, and that is Daniel. You remember Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 4, verses 7 through 9, we are told that Nebuchadnezzar makes Daniel the Rab-Mag. The Hebrew is Rab-Mag. Rab means chief. Daniel was made chief of the Magi. So he was the head of all the Magi in Babylon. Now, as the head of the Magi, you suppose Daniel might have passed on some of what he knew of what God had given to these Magi? And especially since they're interested in stars, do you think he might have passed on any prophecies that had to do with stars? Yes, you say. He probably would have. Does one come to mind? No, you say. Please tell us. Okay, I will. Do any of you remember a prophet by the name of Balaam or Balaam or Baalam? Ever remember Balaam? No? He had an animal. It was mentioned in chapel this morning. He had a donkey. And what did that donkey do? He talked to him. Balaam was on his way to curse Israel. Balaam was a prophet in the area where Israel was going on their way to the promised land. And the local king wanted Balaam to curse Israel. And on his way there, an angel stood in the way, and the donkey could see him, but Balaam couldn't. And so Balaam was beating his donkey for not going on because he was stopping and running against the wall several times. And finally, the donkey said something to the effect, "What did I ever do to you? I've just saved your life because there's an angel standing there with a sword, and that's why I've not gone on ahead." And of course, Balaam then talks back to the donkey, which is interesting too. But then the Lord said, "Go ahead. I'm going to let you go ahead and go and speak prophetic words about Israel." But when Balaam went to speak the curses, out came blessings. And a part of this blessing, excuse me, I'm talking too much today. Part of this blessing is what is given to us in Numbers 24:17. I want you to take notice of what Balaam says in this prophecy that God puts in his mouth. He says, "I see him, but not now." Try to figure out who the him is here. "I behold him, but not near." That means I can see this person, but they're not close. They're far away. "A star shall come forth from Jacob." Who was Jacob? What's Jacob's other name? Israel. So a star is going to come out of Israel. "And a scepter shall rise from Israel." Notice the couplet here. Jacob and Israel are the same. A star coming forth is the same as a scepter rising. What is a scepter? Zach?
The king's staff.
Right. So that's how you know who the king is, the guy holding the scepter. So when he's saying a star is going to come out of Jacob and a scepter is coming from Israel, the star and the scepter represent the same person. Can you tell so far who this person might be that's far away from Balaam when he's given this prophecy? Who is the king? He has a scepter, he's a king, right? Who is the king that has been promised? Right, it's Jesus, the Messiah is what they would know him as, right? Then he says, and shall crush through the forehead of Moab. That's the king that wanted Israel cursed, was the king of Moab. And instead what happens? Balaam gives a prophecy about someday there's going to come a king out of Israel that you want cursed, and that king is going to crush Moab and tear down all the sons of Sheth. Now, this is a prophecy about a star coming from Israel, about a king that is going to come out of Israel. Now, I think that although star here is kind of used in a figurative sense, I think that as Daniel proclaimed this to his fellow magi, that they may have thought about it as being a literal thing, that someday there might be a star appear out of Israel, out of Jacob, in the sky, that would indicate that this Messiah has come. And I believe that's exactly what happened. So where are the Magi when we're at the time of Jesus? Well, remember, once again, we're the Parthian Empire. This is where the Magi lived. And they're studying the stars. And we want to understand something about the political situation at the time. I think you'll find this interesting. At this time, in this empire, or I should back up a little bit, just before the Magi leave for Jerusalem, in the empire, which is largely the old Persian Empire, right? So the Magi that are there are at least intellectual descendants of Daniel from the time of Babylon. Daniel was also there when Persia took over, and now years later, the Magi are still running things as much as they can, but they are part of a group called the Megistanes, which is not important to know. It's just, but if you ever see that, and so they function kind of like the U.S. Senate. So there's a group of Magi that had some authority in the Parthian Empire. Now, one of their duties was to have absolute control over the selection of a king, like we said before. All right. Now, Rome and Parthia were violent enemies. You can see they kind of butt up against each other. And so they're always going back and forth. They often fought against one another in this part of the world, which included, Israel's right here, so it's in the general vicinity. And it's these Parthians who helped Antigonus. Remember Antigonus? Who had been driven out, taken back to Rome. He escaped and came back and reconquered Jerusalem with the help of the Parthians. And a part of that was driving Herod out of Galilee. And remember, Herod's brother, Phaziel, was captured and died in the process. Herod, remember, went to Rome, received a proclamation of him being king, brought troops back and drove Antigonus, or captured Antigonus, killed him, and drove the Parthians out. All right, remember all that? Now, I want you to picture this. Herod now is king of the Jews, and he's in Jerusalem. The Parthians are always wanting to fight against Rome. But they had a king by the name of Phraates IV who was unwilling to fight. And there was a lot of unrest in Parthia because Phraates' new wife that he married, his queen, was actually from Italy. So the Magi want to fight against Rome, and here their king has married a woman from Rome. And this woman convinced Phraates to send his sons, which are her stepsons, you know, they weren't her biological sons, to send his sons to Rome for their safety. So she says, send your sons to Rome because they're not safe here, because there's plots against you and all that. Well, she had a son also through Phraates who remained there. So what was she doing? In reality, she was getting rid of anyone that might step in her way of gaining control. Because after Phraates' sons were sent to Rome, she poisoned him in 2 BC. So her son, Phraates, ascended to the throne. When he took the throne, and he called himself Phraates V, so he took the same name, the fifth, but his real name was Phraates. I'm sorry, Phraates. That's hard to say, so I'm just going to call him Phraates V. When he took the throne, his mother, whose name was Musa, married him and ruled alongside of him. So he married his mother. And so she functioned as queen, and he was king. Well, the Parthian nobility, including the Megestanes, were just horrified at this, that the man would marry his own mother. They disapproved of that, and they also didn't like the fact that now they've got a king who is non-Parthian. He's only partial Parthian. He's Roman through his mother. And as a result of that, they eventually forced them. And here, by the way, here's a coin with, this has Phraates V's head, and that has another image. This is a coin with Phraates V on one side and his mother Musa on the other side. I'm sorry, his mother/wife on the other side. So they printed coins with that. But the Persian royalty forced them into exile, into Roman territory. Now, as we think about the Magi then, coming at the time of Christ, they're coming here. They're coming out of a situation where the king that they had was not willing to fight against Rome. And then the next king was partial Roman, and they forced him out. So now, what do they need? What do they need in Parthia? A king, right? So the kingmakers need somebody to make king. Isn't that interesting? Because when they come to Jerusalem, what are they looking for? They're looking for the one who was born king of the Jews. Well, when they arrived in Jerusalem, how did they come? Did they come on camels? This is the picture we often see, right? Something like this. The Magi coming on camels, right? And every play you've seen, any reenactments, any movies you've seen, they're probably always on camels, right? Isn't that what you always see? Is that accurate? The answer is no. Does anybody know why that's not accurate? Matthew?
They came on horses.
How do you know that?
Because they were kingmakers, so they had a lot of money, and they won't go on camels because they were like for poor people.
Okay, good point. Anybody remember? Who had Mrs. Henry in first grade? Okay, you're the only one. Do you remember her talking about that? Maybe in the back of your mind. Maybe it's in that file cabinet back there and you just don't realize it. Yeah, it wasn't, and that certainly is a good point. But in addition to that, two things. One, remember what kind of an area is the land of the Medes, where the Parthian Empire is largely located? Do you remember what kind of an area it is? No. Who was from the land of the Medes? That you know about. Not a name, but whose wife was from the land of the Medes? Nebuchadnezzar. What did Nebuchadnezzar do for his wife, who was from the land of the Medes? Built the Hanging Gardens. Why did he build Hanging Gardens? Remind her of home, because her home was a mountainous area. with lots of trees and so on. When's the last time you saw camels up in the mountains? Anybody? No. No, they don't. They can't go in Mount Assyrius. They're built for what? Desert. They got those big flat feet. They go in desert. It doesn't work well in the mountains. So, number one reason why the Parthians wouldn't have come on camels. Number two reason is we know historically that the area of Parthia was known for its horses, not for its camels. Here's a drawing of a Parthian light horse cavalryman. Here's another drawing of a cavalryman. Here's a ceramic plaque of a mounted horse, a mounted archer among the Parthians. Here is a relief of the Roman Emperor Valerian a couple hundred years later, showing with the Parthian horse. And in fact, we even know today, if you know anything about horses, you have probably heard of a Persian stallion, have you not? That's what they're known for, not camels. Did you ever hear of a Persian camel? No. So when the Magi came to Jerusalem, I believe they came on horseback as part of a contingent of cavalry. That shows Valerian kneeling before a Parthian on a stallion. And this one shows Strabo called the Parthian the most elegant riding horse in the Roman Empire. So they were known for that. Here's a painting that someone did showing the Parthians on horseback. Their great skill at horseback, at archery, and even attacking with lances. In all of the paintings and pictures that I've ever seen, all of them show the Magi on camels. You might say, well, how did that happen? I think, because most of what we have is from the Middle Ages and following, I think people living in Europe in the Middle Ages just automatically associated camels with the Middle East and thought, you know, anybody that was riding would be riding on camels. But camels were mostly used for transporting stuff. They were like trucks. Weren't necessarily something to ride on. Later on, the Arabs would ride them more, but for the most part, they were led along. Just like, remember that partial statue we saw at Petra? The guy was leading the camel, if you can imagine what the statue looked like. I found one painting, though, that shows what it was probably like, and unfortunately it's a little bit blurry. But this painting does show them coming in on horseback. And so whoever painted this, that European, had it right. All right, so they're coming in on horseback. And it still is a long ways to travel. We'll talk about the timing of it in a little bit. But, you know, there are always things that kind of irritate people as they go along. And so we have found here, we found in some ancient manuscripts, the top 10 things overheard as the wise men journeyed to Bethlehem. Okay, ready? Here we go. The number 10 thing was, man, I'm starting to get a head rush from this frankincense. Yeah, I can do that to you. Number 9, you guys ever eat camel meat? I hear it tastes like goat. Number 8, if you think this road is rough, you ought to take the road to Galilee sometime. Number 7, you know, I used to go to school with a girl named Bethlehem. Number 6, if they can send a man to Damascus, why can't they make a saddle that doesn't chafe? Number 5, what kind of a name is Balthazar anyhow? Phoenician? Balthazar is one of the traditional names of one of the 3 wise men. Number 4, I hope we get to an oasis soon. My butt's starting to go numb. Number 3, hey, do either of you guys know why myrrh is spelled with a Y instead of a U? Number 2, okay, whose camel just spit? And the number 1 thing overheard on the wise men's journey to Bethlehem was, all this staring at a star while riding a camel is making me woozy. Okay, so things you didn't know and still wish you didn't know. Okay. A little levity, very little. All right, so next we want to talk about the star. What was the star? You ever wondered about that? What was that star they saw? Well, different people have speculated about that star over the years. Some have speculated that it was a comet, and we'll talk about some of the reasoning behind these, why it couldn't have been some of these things. Right off the top of your heads, why would you say it couldn't have been a comet that they saw? Yeah, the star wasn't moving when they first saw it. Yeah, it wasn't like it shot across the sky. What else? All right. The other thing is that, as we'll find out, that it disappears and then reappears later. Okay. Some say it was a nova. In other words, a star that burst upon the scene. One idea that I came up with a number of years ago that I thought made a lot of sense, because you've got this problem of them seeing a light in the sky, and then they don't see it, and then later on they see it again when they leave Jerusalem. And I got to thinking, well, what was happening on the night that Jesus was born? And remember, they're all the way over here in Persia. Okay, they're all the way over here in this area. And what's happening here in Bethlehem the night Jesus was born? Any lights going on? Have you guys read Luke chapter 2? What, John? Angels. Remember the angel appeared and all the angels? And we're told that the angels filled the sky and the glory of the Lord shone around them. That's what? That's light, right? So I thought, I wonder if all that light over here might have appeared to the people that far away as a star in the sky. Because it would have been just a little bit of light. Well, that would help explain then why they didn't see it and then later saw it again, because God sent light again. And I was satisfied with that. Oh, I wanted to put the picture up. I was satisfied with that for a time until I found out some more information, which I will share with you. Some have pointed to a conjunction of planets. You know, when you look up in the sky and see a planet, what are some of the planets you can see at night? Jupiter. Is that considered the morning or evening? I can't remember.
Thank you.
The evening star is Jupiter, and the morning one isn't it Mars? Is that the other? Well, you can imagine if a couple of planets kind of cross each other in our, I mean, not literally, but in our vision, it would make it brighter, right? And so maybe that's what it was, so that it was only there for a time and then left. And we're going to look at the evidence for that. But a couple of things that we need to keep in mind, and we're going to watch a video that explains this. That whatever happened in the sky, first of all, indicated birth. So it had to look like a new star, indicating that there was a birth there. Secondly, it had to indicate kingship. So a lot of times a new star would indicate that there's going to be a king. But there's something particular about this one that would have to indicate that there's a king that was born. Thirdly, it had to indicate that it was the king of the Jews. Not just any old star, but is there anything there to indicate that this king was king in Israel? Fourthly, it must rise in the east, like most other stars. So it had to come in the east. And it appeared at an exact time. It wasn't just something that kind of progressed over a long period of time, slowly became a star. It appeared at a certain time. Next, Herod didn't know when it appeared. He didn't know about the star. Didn't know that there had been a new star in the sky. Remember, he had to ask the Magi when it happened. Seventh, it endured over a considerable period of time. So long enough for them to see it and take note of it. Eighth, it went ahead of them as they traveled from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, but not from Parthia to Jerusalem. They didn't follow the star there. Now, a lot of people talk about the wise men following the star all the way. No. If you notice, and we'll look at the text here soon, if you'll notice, they saw the star when they left Jerusalem on the way to Bethlehem. It says, "Behold, the star was there." Unexpectedly, it returned. Ninth, it stopped, because we're told the star stopped over Bethlehem. over the house, in fact, where Jesus was at the time. All right, so that's a lot that has to match up with whatever we figure out about this star, whatever the star is. And we're going to look next. Now, let's tell you what. Yeah, we're going to look next because of the time element. I'm not going to start the video today. We're going to watch a video that talks about a guy who researched this, and I think found the answer to the question of what was the star. But let's look first at what it says in Matthew's Gospel. If you have your Bibles with, anybody have their Bible with them? Just grab one of the Bibles back there on the back shelf, second shelf down. Amelia, Mia, grab some Bibles and hand them out, please. And let's look at Matthew chapter 2. Or do I have that in your notes already? Do I have Matthew 2 printed out? No, okay.
Missed some of them.
Okay, I don't have a place in your notes for this, so we're just going to look at the scripture together and see what we see. All right, Matthew chapter 2. Let's find it as quickly as you can. Matthew chapter 2. Keep looking while I'm reading if you don't have it yet. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, and which Herod is this? Herod the Great. Behold, Magi from the east, remember Parthian is east of Israel, arrived in Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Now, if you think about what's just been said there, what is it that for which the Magi are looking? For what did they say they were looking? Okay, a king that they would worship. And what specifically did they say about this king? He's king of the Jews. And what other important word did they use to describe this king of the Jews? He is born king of the Jews. Now think about it. Who was king of the Jews at this time? Herod the Great. How did he get to be king of the Jews? He was appointed by Rome. If you've got a king who was appointed, and then you've got a king who was born king, which one has the priority? The one who's born. Now you know what kind of guy Herod was. How does Herod feel about anybody that might take over his throne? He wants to kill him. Very paranoid about this. So, how does he feel when these guys come into town saying they're looking for someone who was born king of the Jews? Immediately that's a threat to him, isn't it? Because he was appointed, not born. So Herod was the king in fact, but a king just born would be the king legally. Now the expression that says that the Magi saw his star in the east, literally that means rising in the east. It doesn't mean it appeared in the east. It means that as it came into its rising, it was rising in the eastern sky. Look at verse 3. And when Herod the king heard it, he was, what's the word you have there? Troubled. Any other words? What? Perturbed. Okay. And all Jerusalem with him. Now you know why Herod was troubled, right? Because he's paranoid anyway. But why is all Jerusalem troubled?
Because they're looking for a savior from Rome.
That is that would be true, except I'm not sure they realize that at this time. All they know is that Herod is troubled. Do you think Herod told them right away, hey, the reason I'm upset because somebody's been born king of the Jews? No, they wouldn't have even known that. So why would Jerusalem all be troubled? What do they know about when Herod is troubled? He kills people. Do you see why all Jerusalem was troubled too? Yeah, because when Herod gets upset, people die. So Herod becomes agitated because he fears any challenge to his throne. And you remember he killed his own sons, he killed his wife, his mother-in-law, his brother-in-law, and on and on. So let's see, what did Caesar Augustus say about Herod?
He would rather be mistake than his
Son, right, good. All right, now, also put in mind that these magi are from where? Too many things to go back. I'm going to go back to the map. Okay, that's not going to work. They're from where? Parthia. So they're from over this area, Parthia, and they're coming in to Jerusalem. And does Herod have any connection? Does he have any history with Parthians? Has he ever been around Parthians before?
Didn't he ask him for help or something?
No. Quite the opposite. Remember? It was Parthians that came in with Antigonus and drove Herod out, and his brother died. Right? So how does Herod feel about Parthians? Doesn't like them. He hates them. Right? Because of what happened to his brother, he hates them. So you can see another reason why he would be upset. These Parthians have arrived in Jerusalem and claiming to be looking for the one who was born king of the Jews. Now, why doesn't he do something about it? Why doesn't he send his army against these Parthians?
He wants to see what's going on.
He wants to see what's going on. That would be one reason. But you know what else is true of the time? His army was out of town. Just at that time. His army was helping the Romans put down an insurrection up in Syria. He had no army. So that's why he is so conciliatory toward the Magi. Acts like he is inviting them and to find this king and all this because he has no power. Because if you think about it, traditionally we say how many Magi came? 3. Where do we get that?
Because of the gifts.
Because there are 3 gifts. Does that automatically mean there are 3 people? No. In fact, could you imagine the Magi, this Megistanes, these Persian cavalrymen, or at least they have access to the Persian cavalry? Can you imagine just 3 of them coming all that way? I imagine they came with the whole entourage. I wouldn't be surprised to find out someday that there were hundreds of them coming into Jerusalem for their own protection. And Herod is there by himself. His army's gone. So he has to kind of go along with them. All right, so verse 4 says, gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, so the Jewish leadership, the scribes especially are the ones that know the Old Testament, right? Because they're the copiers. He began to inquire of them where the Christ, the Messiah, was to be born. Because he just heard that the Messiah has been born. He knows that when they're talking about a king of Israel being born, he knows that could quite possibly be the Messiah. He knows enough that he understands that. And that there's no distinction between this king and Messiah. He knows they're the same. And so he wants to find out where he's to be born. Now, we know from a few verses later what he intends by that. Why does he want to know where the Messiah is to be born? So he can kill him. Isn't it interesting that Herod believes the prophecies about where Messiah would be born, but doesn't believe the prophecies that say that he will be a great king, he thinks he can thwart that by killing him. He kind of picks and chooses what he believes. So, verse 5, they said to him, the scribes, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. That's because in the list of towns that was made at the time, Bethlehem wasn't even big enough to make the list. But the prophet says to them, the prophet Micah says to them, don't feel badly, because someday out of you will come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Now, when Herod heard that, that had to kind of get at him a little bit too, because what kind of ruler was Herod? Was he a shepherd kind of guy? No. He was an autocrat, a tyrant. He ruled with an iron fist. And so to hear about there's going to come a ruler someday who's going to be a shepherd, that had to kind of make him feel a little angry too, because of the contrast. All right. Then verse 7. Then Herod secretly called the Magi and ascertained from them the time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make careful search for the child, and when you have found him, report to me, that I too may come and worship him. Oh, don't you just want to smack him? And having heard the king, they went their way, and lo, or behold, the star which they had seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Why? Because they hadn't seen it since they left. And now all of a sudden it's appearing again. We'll find out what that star was tomorrow.